Peppermint is never grey. Esther Holroyd knew that the way she knew her own hands. She lifted one of Humbug Billy's new sweets off the tray and did not shudder. She only turned it over in her palm. Ash-coloured. Dull, wrong, she carried it to 3 chemists that Saturday, and each one handed it straight back. Daft and a bad boiling, Mrs., no worse than sugar and plaster. 9 trays sat on that stall, 1,000 sweets, and the whole green market took the men's word over hers. She wet it once to her lip, a grit, a faint sweet salt hiding under the mint. She wrapped one humbug in paper. She put it in her apron pocket, and she told Billy not to sell. If you believe old hands know things young eyes can't see, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I like to know who's listening. Now, let me take you back. Bradford, the autumn of 1858. The West Riding of Yorkshire, where the mills never stopped and the smoke sat low over the rooftops. Esther Holroyd had a stall in the green market. Comfits, mostly, boiled sweets she made herself, in her own pan, over her own fire, in the small hours before the market woke. She was a widow, had been for 4 years, and she was good at what she did. She boiled peppermint the way her mother had taught her. Sugar and water brought slow to the crack. You watch the colour. Sugar boils gold. Then, as it cools, it runs clear. Clear as a window pane. She knew that in her hands, in her wrists, in the ache of her shoulder from stirring. She did not need a clock and she did not need a thermometer. She needed her eyes and her nose and 50-odd years of doing it. There was a thing about Esther that the market did not much think on. Her husband Thomas had kept a druggist's shop on Ivegate. 19 years he ran it, and 19 years she swept behind that counter. She had weighed out arsenic in that shop. For the fly papers, for the rat kill. White powder, fine as flour, and she had measured it into twists of paper 100 times over. She knew arsenic by its look. She knew it by its weight. She had never once, not in 19 years, mistaken it for sugar. That is the thing to hold on to. Keep it in your pocket, the way she kept that humbug in hers. Every Saturday she gave sweets away. The ragged children, the ones with no boots and no fathers, they came round the back of her stall, and she pressed a comfit into each grubby hand. Free. She never spoke of it. It was simply a thing she did, the way some folk say grace. Now, you have to understand the trade in 1858. Sugar was dear, very dear, and a stall holder had to make a shilling stretch, so they cut the sweets, they mixed in a cheaper white powder to bulk out the sugar. Plaster of Paris, mostly the trade had a word for it. They called it Daft, and here is the part that ought to make you sit up. Cutting your sweets with Daft was not a crime. Not in 1858. It was ordinary. It was trade. Everybody did it, and nobody hid it. The white powder moved through the town by the sack, from maker to middleman to stall, and not one man in that chain was obliged to know exactly which white powder he was handling. As long as it was cheap, and it was white, it went in the pan. Hold on to that too. It matters more than you know yet. The 30th of October, a Saturday. Humbug Billy, that was William Hardacre, a stall holder like Esther, only younger and greedier, set out a fresh lot of peppermint humbugs. He'd bought them cheap, off a man named Joseph Neal of Stone Street, who made sweets by the hundredweight. And Esther saw them from across the way, and something in her went still. They were dull, grey, flecked, ill-polished, gritty to the eye even from 6 feet off. A good humbug shines, it catches the light. These sat on the tray like little stones, so she went over, and she picked one up. Peppermint is never grey, she said. She wasn't shouting. She said it flat, the way you'd say the rain's come on. I've boiled 1,000 and not one came out the colour of ash. She wet it to her lip, just touched it to her tongue. And there it was. A grit that shouldn't be there. and under the mint, faint but certain, a sweetish salt. A taste she half remembered from another counter, another life. She set the humbug back down on the tray, careful, the way you'd set down something you didn't trust. Billy laughed at her, but here's the thing, he didn't deny it, he told her plain. He'd pressed Neil for a discount, he said, because it'd come out badly coloured. Got it for half what he'd have paid for a good lot. He'd even eaten one himself that morning, and felt a bit queer after. Sour in the belly. But a stall has to earn, he said. Grey or not, a humbug's a humbug, and the children can't see colour when it's a ha'penny a twist. And he laughed again and turned to serve a customer, and that was Esther seen off. The first time. But she didn't let it lie. That is not the sort of woman she was. She took the grey humbug, one of them, in her hand, and she went to find a man of science. If they wouldn't take a comfit-woman's word, they'd take a chemist's, so she thought. The first was Silas Paget. He had a shop off the market and a good coat. He took the humbug, turned it in his fingers, gave it barely a look. Daft and a poor boil. Mistress, he said. Plaster's got in heavier than it should. Won't kill anybody. Sweets are half plaster across this town and always have been, and he handed it back. She went to a second. Cuthbert Vane, older, drier, spectacles on a chain. He held it to the window light, sniffed it once, and gave a little shrug. Sugar and plaster, he said. No worse than what I ate as a lad. You've a keen eye, I'll grant you, but there's nothing here. He handed it back. And she went to a third, Dr. Ambrose Emmett, who had the most letters after his name and the least patience for a woman with a sweet in her hand. He didn't even take it properly. He glanced. He smiled the way men smile when they've already decided. A comfit-woman's fancy, he said. You've boiled sugar so long you think you can smell the devil in it. Go home, missus, there's nothing wrong with the boy's sweets that a better sugar wouldn't fix. 3 men. 3 of them. Each one handed it back. And the market saw it happen. That's the part that stung. Not the being wrong, she wasn't wrong, but the being overruled in the open before the whole green market, 3 men of science against 1 widow's senses. And when 3 coats agree, who listens to an apron? They took the men's word. Of course they did. She could see it in the faces. The little nods, old Esther and her fancies. Now here is where I have to take you somewhere Esther could not go. Somewhere the market never saw. Because while 3 chemists were handing that grey humbug back and telling her it was nothing, the reason it was something was sitting in a druggist's shop a few miles off, and no one in Bradford knew a thing about it. Charles Hodgson kept a druggist's at Baildon Bridge, in Shipley, and Hodgson was ill. Abed, that week, poorly, so when Joseph Neal's man, a lodger named James Archer, came round to fetch the Daft for Neal's sweet-making, the master wasn't there to serve him. Instead it fell to the apprentice. A boy named William Goddard. 5 weeks in the trade. 5 weeks. The boy went to the store. And in that store stood 2 casks, side by side, near enough identical. One held the Daft, the plaster of Paris, harmless, the stuff that had gone into 10,000 sweets before, and the one standing right beside it, unlabelled, held arsenic trioxide. White, fine, to a 5-week apprentice, indistinguishable, neither cask marked, neither cask locked, just 2 barrels of white powder, twins, shoulder to shoulder in a sick man's store. And the boy filled 12 pounds from the wrong one, 12 pounds of arsenic, weighed out as Daft. Carried back to Neal's. Boiled into Billy's cheap grey humbugs, the ones that came out badly coloured, the ones Billy got at half price, the ones now sitting in 9 trays in the green market. You know it now. Esther did not. The market did not. Only you and I, sitting here, know why that sweet was grey. That is why it was dull. That is why it was gritty. That is the sweet salt she tasted under the mint. Her senses had read it true, every last thing about it, a full day before any instrument in the town would confirm a word she said. She went home that night, and she could not settle. She wasn't a schemer. She had no plan, no notion of revenge, no clever trap to catch the chemists in their error. She had something simpler and older than that. She had certainty. And she couldn't sleep on it. So the next morning, she did the only thing she could think to do. She went stall to stall, door to door. Every soul she could reach in the green market and the streets around it, she told the same plain thing. Don't buy Billy's humbugs today. There's summat wrong with them. I've tasted it. Some listened. Some laughed the way Billy had. She kept her own grandchildren well away. No sweet from that tray was going near their mouths, not while she drew breath. And before she left her own kitchen, she did one last thing. She took a single grey humbug, the one she'd carried to 3 chemists and been handed back 3 times, and she wrapped it in a twist of clean paper. And she put it deep in her apron pocket, not for herself. She didn't rightly know what for, only that a thing 3 men swore was harmless ought to be kept, whole and untasted, where she could lay her hand on it. She buttoned the pocket. And she went out into the market, one widow with a paper twist and a warning, against 3 chemists' word and 9 full trays and a whole town that had already made up its mind. The trays were still selling, the children were still coming, and the sun was going down on the 30th of October. The trays sold fast that night. That was the cruel part of it. The dull grey that should have warned every buyer off did the opposite. Billy dropped his price for the poor colour, and a cheap sweet on a Saturday night is a cheap sweet. Children came with a ha'penny warm in their fists, a ha'penny, a twist. And Billy weighed them out with a smile and a wink, the way he always did. Some of them stopped. That was Esther's work. A woman would come with her little one in tow, and she'd remember the widow's face and the widow's words, and she'd look at the sweet in her hand a moment longer than she meant to. Grey, gritty, under the thumb. And she'd set it back on the tray. Walk on, buy an orange instead, or nothing at all. But here is the thing about a refusal. It leaves no mark. A death goes in a ledger. A doctor writes it down, and a clerk copies it, and it lives in the record forever. But a woman who put a sweet back and walked away, that never got written anywhere. No one counted her. No one ever will. And yet she is the whole point of this story. So the night ran on like that. One family turned away. One child, 3 stalls over, that Esther never reached, handed up her ha'penny and got her paper twist and popped a grey humbug in her cheek on the way home. The clock ticked, the 9 trays emptied, and by the time the market shut, near enough all of it was gone, out into the streets of Bradford, into pockets and mouths and pantries. 1,000 sweets scattered across the town. Esther went home. She'd done what she could. It didn't feel like enough. It never does. Sunday came. And Sunday is when it broke. It didn't come slow. It came all at once, all across Bradford, in houses that had no connection to each other but one. A sweet bought Saturday night. By morning the sickness was in a dozen homes, then a score, then more than anyone could keep track of. The same signs in every one. The same fast, terrible turn. There was a physician in the town, Dr. John Henry Bell, and he went house to house that day, as a good doctor did. And somewhere between the 3rd house and the 10th, he stopped in the street. Because he'd seen sickness sweep a town before. He'd seen the cholera. And this wore none of the cholera's face. This was something else. Something that came in a straight line from one Saturday night, one stall, one cheap grey sweet. I'll not linger on the houses. There were small coffins that week in Bradford. There were blinds drawn down in the middle of the day, and mothers who'd handed a treat to a child and would carry that for the rest of their lives. 21 souls, in the end, and near 200 more who sickened and lived, some of them never quite right again. I'll leave the grief where it belongs, behind those drawn blinds and out of my mouth. It is not mine to make a show of. But you understand now what Esther had tasted a week before. You understand what the grey was. They sent the humbugs to a man named Felix Marsh Rimington, Bradford's public analyst, the qualified witness, the one man in this whole sorry business whose word could stand for reality itself. And Rimington did what no chemist at a market stall had troubled to do. He tested it properly. He weighed it. He ran it through the reagents. And what he found stopped the breath in that room. Arsenic trioxide, white as sugar, deadly as anything the earth holds. Not a trace, not a whisper. Grains of it in a single humbug, enough in one sweet. One to kill a grown man. And across the whole batch, boiled into those 9 trays, 12 pounds of it. 12 pounds! Rimington ran the arithmetic himself, and the number he came to was the one that haunts this story still. Enough poison in those trays to have killed hundreds. Not 21. Hundreds. Now you know why she couldn't sleep on it. She'd been right. Every last thing about it she'd read true. They held the inquest. And here is where the two halves of this story finally stand in the one room. Esther Holroyd came to that inquest, and when her moment came, she did a small thing. She reached into her apron pocket. She undid the button she'd fastened a week before, and she drew out a twist of clean paper, and she opened it on the table in front of Rimington and Bell. And there it was. One grey humbug, whole, untasted, the one she'd carried to 3 chemists and been handed back 3 times. Kept, all this while, exactly as it was. The one refused sweet in all of Bradford, saved whole, and Dr. Bell looked at it, and Rimington looked at it, and Bell said, plain, so the whole room heard it, that this woman had named the colour, and the grit, and the faint sweet salt under the mint, a full week before any instrument in the town could say a word. Her senses, he said, had matched his science to the letter. She'd needed no reagent. She'd needed no test. She had 19 years behind a druggist's counter on Ivegate, and she'd known arsenic the moment it touched her lip. And now the 3 men who'd handed it back. Silas Paget was in that room, and Paget could not lift his eyes to her. He kept them on his own hands, on the table, anywhere but the widow's face. The man who'd called it a poor boil. Cuthbert Vane took a different road. Vane straightened his spectacles on their chain and found his voice, and what he said was that the Daft was lawful. That was all they'd meant, he said. Only that the plaster was no crime. As if anyone had asked him about the plaster. As if she'd walked into his shop and inquired after the law on stretching sugar. He answered the question no one had put to him, because he could not bear to answer the one they had. And Dr. Ambrose Emmett. The man with the most letters after his name. The man who'd looked at a widow and a wrong sweet and called it a comfit-woman's fancy. Emmett stood in that room and said nothing at all. He'd gone grey himself, grey as the humbug on the table. There was no fancy left to sneer at. There was only the number Rimington had read aloud, and the small coffins across the town, and one paper twist that a woman had known better than 3 men of science. Then they traced it back. And this is the part you'll want to hold on to. It began at a druggist's shop at Baildon Bridge, in Shipley, Charles Hodgson's shop. But Hodgson himself was ill, abed, the whole while, and a man named James Archer came to fetch Daft for Neil's sweets, and the lad who served him was William Goddard. 5 weeks an apprentice, 5 weeks. And Goddard went to the store to weigh out 12 pounds of Daft, plaster of Paris, harmless, and there in that store stood 2 casks, side by side, near enough identical. One held the Daft, and one, unlabelled, held arsenic trioxide, and a 5-week apprentice, sent for the one, filled 12 pounds from the other. That was it. That was the whole of it. 2 casks that looked the same, one of them not marked, and a boy too new to know the difference. And when the West Riding Assizes were done, do you know what they found? No crime. In law, no crime had been done. Nobody swung for it. Nobody was so much as convicted. Because every man in that chain had only done the ordinary thing. Neil bought his Daft as men bought Daft. Hodgson sold it as men sold it. Goddard weighed out a white powder because that was the trade, white powder by the sack, and no man in the line obliged to ask which white powder it was. And that is the deeper thing, the thing worth carrying out of this story. The poison could only travel because the lawful cheat had already built the road. Cutting sweets with plaster was ordinary trade. It had taught every hand in the chain not to ask questions. It had made the anonymous sack normal, the unlabeled cask normal, the not knowing normal. The arsenic didn't force a new door. It walked straight through the one that honest adulteration had already propped open. Now, what came of it? Back in the Green Market, the neighbours came to Esther's stall, not to make a fuss of her, not to call her a hero, she'd have hated that, and they knew it. They came because when you have looked at a grey sweet and a wrong colour and had to guess who to trust, you go, ever after, only to the hands you trust. They bought their comfits from her, because she was the one who'd known, and it was the others who said it, never her, what her refusal had held back that week. And here at the last is the arithmetic, run out plain, the way it deserves. 12 pounds of arsenic, enough to kill hundreds, and 21 died. Only 21, if you can say only of a number like that. And the space between hundreds and 21, that gap, those saved lives, that was not luck. That was dozens of ordinary people, mothers, market women. And one widow chief among them, going stall to stall on a Saturday morning, who looked at a grey, gritty, wrong little sweet and quietly said no. They saved more lives than the whole of Bradford science did that week, and not one of them got written down. Their survival left no paperwork at all. So, I am writing it down here. That is what this is for. The batch changed the law of the land. It drove the Adulteration of Food and Drink Act of 1860. And then, the Pharmacy Act of 1868, that at last made a chemist sign his own name for poison, and put an end to the unlabelled twin cask standing quiet in the corner of a store. Her refusal, and all those unrecorded refusals with it, got paved into the statute book. It is why to this day poison carries a label. That began in Bradford. That began with a grey sweet in a widow's palm. As for Esther, she went on boiling her peppermint, gold in the pan, clear when it cooled, the way sugar is meant to go. And every Saturday she handed the ragged children a free comfit, as she always had. One of them, years on, was a woman grown. A child Esther had turned back from Billy's stall that very night, sent home empty-handed and cross about it, and alive because of it. She never once said I told you so, not to Paget, not to Vane, not to Emmett. When Dr. Emmett passed her stall in the years after, and he did pass it, she'd give him a nod. And she'd say only that the mint had boiled well today. If you believe old hands know things young eyes can't see, that a lifetime in the fingers can outrun all the letters after a name, then you already knew how this would end.
Tell me the town you're listening from. I read every one.